Tirupurukundram, is this something, the kind of polarization that could this
Yeah,
have been avoided had you acted sooner?
You're successful because of efficient corruption or some nonsense to that effect. I feel like we're going into an election where, on the one hand, it's rare for a government to go into an election.
But if there was something that you could have done differently or you could have done better?
Because of the AIADMK's association with the BJP, so the basic conflict is that Hindi, Hindutva, when it was only the DMK and AIADMK, it was not that great a gap in philosophy. It was much more in personality and kind of nuances. Now the risk is, are you going to remain the culture you have been for thousands of years? Or somebody tells you what you should wear, what you should speak, how you should behave. AIADMK says we still want only 2-language formula, and BJP says 3-language formula or nothing. This notion of centrally sponsored schemes itself is bad in constitutional design. Who started it? If I do it, I consider it welfare. If you do it, I consider it freebie. No better example of this than the Honorable Prime Minister coming up with the phrase Revdi culture.
What do you make of Vijay? Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a busy schedule. But I saw a bunch of interviews before I came, and I could see that you're quite bored with the repetition of questions. What question now seems like a cliche that you're just annoyed with?
No, I almost feel like somebody has given them a script, particularly these northern channels, They all say basically the three things. Why should you not have a double engine government, which is a meaningless term? Is it that you're successful because of efficient corruption or some nonsense to that effect? Not just Tamil Nadu, all of South India. And something to the effect of law and order is really bad. Well, particularly the last one, the data is very clear. Actually, right from COVID till today, the crime rate in every dimension is reducing. But of course, the uniqueness is that CCTV cameras, cell phones have become ubiquitous, and the reach of mobile, social media on mobile phones has become extremely high. So, I'm not even saying it's wrong, I'm saying rightfully so, these events get reported much, much more, and people get aware of them much, much more. But the stats are still the stats. So, I feel like we're going into an election where, on the one hand, it's rare for a government to go into an election, in my limited experience, with relatively such a good track record and relatively low anti-incumbency. You could argue rightly or wrongly, but it's a different story. And yet find these kind of trumped up questions is almost the reading of a script. Very, very likely so, as you know and I know. And so I'm a bit annoyed by that. But, of course, if they are thoughtful questions, then it's very engaging, because that's how we kind of learn and discover how to do better. Because, we see what we see. You go around many places. So you see a lot of different things. And so you ask from a different perspective. So there's, I suppose, ups and downs.
You have positioned DMK versus BJP this election. Although your primary rival, so to speak, and you said this in another interview, is AIADMK. You said you can't write them off. So is this because it suits a narrative?
Yes and no. I think, there's an interview or a documentary from the NDTV on this Tirupurukundram issue. And my friend, the AIADMK member of the Legislative Assembly from Tirupurukundram, is also interviewed, as I am. And he also says, actually, this is not an issue on which we will see any great kind of divide. This is not going to rile up the masses, not going to be a big electoral issue. We are all integrated and happy here. And he says, for example, we don't agree with the 3-language formula. There's an unrelated context. So I'm saying, my point is that if we set the AIADMK aside for a minute, the natural value system of the BJP, especially under this administration of the BJP compared to, let's say, Vajpayee's, is profoundly antithetical to the natural philosophy of any regional party.
I agree.
Whether that is us or YSR or TDP or any regional party, and the southern branches, I dare say, of the national parties or states of the national party. So the big gap is we want our individuality. We want to retain our culture. We want unity in diversity. We want to continue the diversity. We want to get fairer treatment. We want to have more voice at the table because our population is shrinking and we are getting we are the economic powerhouse, but the population weakness. And of course, every putative emperor, every putative dictator, every putative kind of control person wants to have homogeneity to make it easier to manage and easier to control. So the basic conflict is that Hindi, Hindutva, kind of one nation, one X is never going to succeed in Tamil Nadu, ever. It is because you see, I can do politics on 100 things. I can do politics on performance, on failure, on legislation, on safety, on economic growth, on jobs, but no politics is going to be as emotive and as kind of impactful as identity risk. If you say, now the risk is, are you going to remain the culture you have been for thousands of years? Are you going to keep your mother tongue? Are you going to be able to continue your customs? Or somebody tells you what you should wear, what you should speak, how you should behave. That politics is always going to be more emotive and more impactful and more driver of voting patterns than anything else. And that survey after survey tells us that because of the ADMK's association with the BJP and its own values, the ADMK stands for the Anna Dravida Munnetra Kalagam. So they say they are following the values of Anna, who said, federalism is important, states' rights are important, Ondriyathil Kutachi, Manalathil Suyachi. Right? We want autonomy and we want coalition or joint responsibility. So in that sense, the ADMK is in a fix because their core identity, even from the days of, when it was only the DMK and the ADMK, it was not that great a gap in philosophy. It was much more in personality and kind of nuances. I can remember sitting in the assembly even when 2016 when Ms. Jayalalitha was still alive. And the big debates were not, you went left, I went right.
How did you perform?
No, the big difference was, I did more than you of good things and you did more than me of bad things. That was the debate. If Kaveri was not resolved, you were at fault, not me. If reservation was done, no, I did more and you did less. It was not an ideological, it was within the same ideology, relative value add or detraction. That's the history of the DMK and ADMK from the days of the creation of the ADMK by Thiru MGR when he separated. Now the ADMK finds itself in a coalition with a party with very profoundly different values. Now, inherently all national parties have limitations.
Of course, including Congress.
Including Congress, because if you are a national party and you try to do what the BJP calls double engine sarkar, which is effectively saying you should have the same alignment, etc., then I'll show you contradictions prima facie. The Congress is in coalition with us in Tamil Nadu. The CPI, CPM also in coalition with us. In Kerala, you've just come back. They're directly against each other, right?
At the same time, West Bengal, they are allies.
Correct. Same way, you take the BJP. In the Hindi belt, people get killed and lynched for transporting cows with or without paperwork as they're perceived to be. And then in Goa and in the northeast, they are all for beef and all for, the consumption. And India, under the last 10 years, under their regime, has become the largest exporter of beef in the world. So when you have a national party, because India is such a vast country with, 1.5 billion almost people, and because each of these states is 80-90 people, and because things like riparian rights or other disputes are going to be interstate, it's very hard to be a national party and have no conflict of interest between right hand, left hand, body. But in the sense that the regional party ADMK and the national party BJP have much more philosophical differences than regional party Tamil Nadu and national party Congress.
Right.
Right? Our value systems are the same. We may have practical problems like the fact Karnataka has a Congress government and we're still fighting about water.
Yeah.
But it's much less than ADMK says we still want only 2-language formula and BJP says 3-language formula or nothing. So those are more profound, and they're because they say, listen, at the end of it, why I think it's a no-brainer. Look, what is language to you? Language is identity. What is religion to you? Religion is identity. Most of us, before we are aware of who we are, those are already set in us because we are born into particular families who practice certain religions, who speak certain languages. And so, unless you're the kind of person who later decides to transform yourself, most of us practice the language and the religion that our forefathers, and mothers gave us. And so, if you start doing politics on that, then it's very dangerous politics because not only will you create schisms, but those can never heal. Right? If you start attacking my identity, or if you use identity to create enemies, perceived enemies, then how will that ever heal? Right? Because I start seeing it as existential.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I would say the track record of this government in Delhi validates and justifies why we feel, even as recently as 2-3 days ago, some other issue has flared up about the NEP and the funding and all that stuff. So every time they try to thrust something down our throats or homogenize us, it makes it easy for us to point that out.
Yeah.
It's not like we're making it up.
But they are a minor player even within the alliance compared to ADMK.
Yeah, yes and no, in the sense that I agree that their organizational capabilities and their field reach is
and
not,
the number of seats, the number of tickets.
True. But then the as somebody pointed out, and I'm not doing politics with this, the alliance sharing in Tamil Nadu in the secular progressive alliance was decided in Chennai. The alliance sharing of the NDA was decided in Delhi. Right? So the relative power in the relationship is quite evident.
You don't see that having changed this time around? DPS seems more assertive than the last time that they were allies.
Yeah, maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but I'm seeing it the other way. I'm saying when he was chief minister, he was much more assertive.
Okay.
And when he's in opposition, he seems much less assertive about protecting his value system.
Fair.
And not that he's caving, but he's not as aggressive about saying my way or the highway, which he tried to do when he was.
What do you
That's why he broke away.
He did,
Remember,
but they've come back together.
I agree. Yes and no. I think, the statements were very clear when he broke, saying that I would never come back. Put another way, they'll accuse us that once we were with the BJP, of course it was a very different BJP under Vajpayee than it is now. But at that time when we broke, we said never, and we meant never. Because actually the opportunity came. When Ms. Jayalalitha passed, we had an internal discussion because there was some question about whether this was the time to, and it was very clear, my chief minister was very clear. He said, what after this? At what point will we be able to say that past this transaction, how do we reconcile the differences in our philosophies? So, just for the sake of one government or one term or one election, we can't do these things. When we said never, we meant never.
Right.
But the ADMK has not been able to hold that line. Right.
What do you make of Vijay as a politician? I know that many DMK leaders don't want to take his name during campaigning.
No, listen, I've said it many places, I say it again. Though I don't watch Tamil movies, so I've not actually watched any movies of his, but he is a force to be reckoned with. I don't think there's any question. In fact, in my distant understanding, because I'm not deeply involved, I think he is a greater draw as a politician than he was as an actor. Because at least from my distance, there were many A actors. There were many top stars. But now he stands alone in his own firmament. So, I've said it very clearly that, of course, democracy benefits from the entrance of new players and new parties, right? Otherwise, the system gets a bit stale. If it is a person like him who can draw a huge crowd, particularly of youngsters who have historically been the least active in politics, then even better. If he can channelize the angst and the expectations of the youth in a constructive way to engage in democracy, even better. Because you look around us, right? Starting with the Arab Spring revolutions and the things that have happened in our neighborhood.
Nepal and Bangladesh.
Why Nepal and Bangladesh? What about Sri Lanka? What about Maldives? What about Pakistan, where Imran Khan was starting to emerge as the kind of focal point of the youth's disgruntlement, and then he got
aspirations too.
Aspirations turn to disgruntlements if they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, right? So in that sense, I would say, in many ways, I think it's a good thing for democracy, for our state, for the system, that somebody like him has emerged into the polity, into the public debate, and I see him as a force to be reckoned with. If he continues, I think, he will have greater and greater impact. Now I'm talking at a fundamental level. As I said earlier today, what is the expected growth rate? What is the future prospects? What is the set? Technicals are, it's Friday evening and there's nobody on the other side. If you want to try and sell, you'll not get a good price because everybody's gone home early. So technicals are like market conditions. So I'm saying, in the course of electoral politics, fundamentals may be your values, your ability to draw the crowd, to get the sentiment on your side. The technicals are, you actually have to go through processes and build institutional capability. And I've been saying this for a while, that I worry whether a new party can actually build in very short order the technical capability to convert 100% of the sentiment into actual vote. And I would say I've been proven right by none other than the most kind of obvious and glaring example, which is that the leader of the party himself filed 2 nominations, one in Perambur and one in Trichy, and there was a discrepancy in the content of these 2. I mean, if that is the level of scrutiny and a kind of second checking and risk management that the leader is filing, then you imagine what it is for others. So I have always said that as great as it is, and I don't at all underestimate his draw, the real question about his impact in this election will be how quickly they can build institutional capacity. It's not a hugely complex thing, but it's not a trivial thing either. And so that's why I say I'm not that sure that this is the election that they're going to make that much difference. But if he persists, then it only goes in one direction, because institutional capability will get built. When I was asked to set up the IT wing of the DMK, that's what I did. I brought in a lot of new members, new officers, and we decided to focus on electoral process management as one of the core capabilities of a party and of our wing. And so both in the 2019 election, 21 election, we fielded independent candidates and put all of our office bearers to work on the process to understand the mechanics. What are the forms? How do they get filled? What are the regulations? What are the affidavits? What is the legal benchmark? These kinds of things. So that takes a little while. So that would be my expectation is that I don't know about this election because, what do we know? I know my constituency much better than I know the overall. But if he persists, he only gets stronger from here.
Tirupurukundram, is this something, the kind of polarization that
what I mean is, it will not even have an impact in Tirupurukundram. I don't think it will have an impact 4 constituencies away or 3 constituencies.
But whatever we've seen, the kind of polarization, because BJP we've seen in other states that they just need a foot in the door, right? And this could be one of it. Could this have been avoided had you acted sooner?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of stuff just crept up. But I'm saying that, could have, would have, should have, there are many second guesses we can do. I'm saying it differently. I'm saying in this documentary that I mentioned earlier, it is remarkable that I, as a sitting MLA from 2 constituencies away and a minister, the MLA sitting in that constituency as an opposition MLA, ADMK member, part of the BJP coalition, and a couple of other people who were like, community workers and organizations, all of us said exactly the same thing. He said, we are too harmonious a culture and society and town and constituency, and we will not see any impact of this whatsoever, not only in the election, which is 6 months away, but in the day-to-day lives of us till then. It is an attempt by who to drive a wedge. But these attempts so far, by God's grace, have not actually worked. And so my own view, the election will tell us the results, but I don't, and forget me, the sitting MLA there said he doesn't see it as an issue in the election.
Fair enough. What's tougher, campaigning or governance?
I think it depends on your personality, but for me, I think governing by far, because I'm an extrovert by nature. I really like interacting with people, and at the age of 40, after I got 4 degrees and 4 majors and had long careers as a consultant, trader, banker, I remember I told my wife, I think I missed my calling. I should have been a lawyer like my father and grandfather and ancestors before me. And I would have been really good at being a lawyer. And without, hesitating for half a second, she came back to me and she said, I don't know about that, but you're not going back to school for your 5th degree. So that was the end of that ambition. Why I'm saying that, at the age of 50, I finally entered politics. And I started to think that maybe this was my calling, is that I should be there to help people, sometimes micro level, sometimes macro level. And I must confess that the last 5 years as a minister, I've been completely, the greatest kind of gift of my life, because I never expected to be in a seat where I could do that much change. My chief minister gave me an inordinate amount of responsibility for a first-time minister. I was Minister for Finance and Pensions, which also includes the Bureau of Public Enterprises and other kind of committees of the Assembly, like estimates and public accounts and so forth. But also for personnel and administrative reforms, also planning and development, economics and statistics. So in some sense, almost the entire administration. And so with his support and backing, because political will is the starting point for everything, I was very proud to say in the Assembly that in 2 years I brought more change in the way government functions, in the audit, in indexation to inflation, in revenue management, in the State Finance Commission, in litigation management, in economic advisory, you name it, than in any 20 years. So that for me was so gratifying. And then, of course, in IT, I happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I built on the work that I'd actually started when I was in finance, which is the state family database and the computerization of all agricultural cooperative societies and things like that. And so we built this tremendous capability now. We have a database that is second to none. Comprehensive family database, and thanks to the Honorable Union Finance Minister, who, when I asked her, she gave for the first time in India an API link into the income tax data. So we actually share between the Government of India and us. So we know who's paying taxes and who's an SSE. And then also, while I was on the GST Council, we agreed that we would share GST data across the states. Otherwise, the only state to union state, and we couldn't see other states. So my friend Dushyant Chautala, who was also at the time on the GST Council and chairman of the Systemic Reforms Committee for a while, we basically, or acting chairman, I forget what he was. But anyway, net result, we agreed that we would share data, and that has turned out to be a boon. So anyway, in all of these ways, I would say we have a much more data-driven and thoughtful plan, and we're able to do the kinds of efficiencies. Look, there's only 3 ways you can improve the government. One, you can improve the revenue stream and do it in an equitable way, that you take more from those who can pay. Actually, all over the world, that is failing. If anything, revenues are going down, and the rich are able to lobby and find ways to not pay. 2, you can cut down the wasteful expenditures and focus on more high growth expenditures, assuming you can identify them. That also is failing all over the world. More and more government spending is in actual cash and direct benefit transfers, and less actually government public goods and services and infrastructure and things like that. Or the third is you can increase the efficiency of your spending. When you spend a rupee, my own estimate was that it was highly inefficient when we came. If I give numbers, I'll get in trouble. But now I say where much greater percentage of that rupee is actually spent properly, or much greater efficiency or reduced cost of friction for people to do things. Like we've just exponentially increased the number of e-service centers from under 8,000 to over 32,000 or something. And we want more and more services brought online. We want less and less human interaction, want more and more automation. We have WhatsApp governance now. Lakhs of people in the last 2 months since we opened it are able to pay their bills, get their certificates. So we have a blockchain wallet where you can keep your educational stuff, validation, driver's license. So we are using technology to improve the efficiency of functioning of government in a way that gives us multiplier effect. So if you ask me, we had this enormous growth last year, relatively. We had 11.19% after many years. Most people think that's because we had some great spurt in investment, but that's not true, because it takes 2-3 years of between investment and GDP growth. There's a gestation period. You can't invest today or commit to invest today and get the growth tomorrow. What really drives it, in our case at least, is much more consumption, because we are a relatively high per capita GDP, but also relatively high per capita consumption state, because we have much better equity. We have much lower Gini coefficient than places like Gujarat. And so this increased government cash payments have increased the economy through the multiplier effect of consumption, but also through things like this where we have made it much more efficient. I don't think it was intended that way back in the day, but it has become that way now. And it starts, the fish always, rots from the head down. So it starts with the IAS officers. And most of them are inertia, kind of ridden. And there is very little incentive for them to do anything. You don't get in trouble for doing nothing. You may get in trouble for doing something. And so, the system is weak in many ways. For example, there's still a so-called rating of officers' performance.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think in my time in the HRM, the personnel administrative reforms plus, now I don't think I've seen a rating lower than 9 point something, and I don't think I've seen, any variability out of 10. So it is designed where there is no carrot, there is no stick, there is no alignment of incentives. You get the best performing person, you cannot promote them out of turn. You get the worst performing person, you suspend them and pay them half the money that their salary. So it is a badly designed system. The government, and of course not only Tamil Nadu, it's across the country. In fact, it's not only across the country. I have a theory, and I've been given a commission to write a book, that all over the world, the reason democracy is in kind of distress, why the people are losing faith in the model of democracy, and disruptors and demagogues are being elected who claim that they're going to break down the system or drain the swamp or, some version of anarchy, is because governments as a whole are failing. Going back to my old point, the revenues are dropping as a percentage of GDP. The expenses are becoming more and more cash handouts and less actual government functioning. And so governance is failing all over the world for many reasons, but usually politics is the basis for a lot of this. Politics has become such short-term, soundbite, social media, bubble-driven, polarized, that there is almost no incentive for people to do the kinds of long-term investment in building greater institutional capability in the government. The complexity of the world keeps increasing. The population overall keeps increasing, at least for now. And the size and ability of governments all over the world keeps shrinking. So we have this mismatch.
You mentioned the union minister with a lot of affection, if I may say so. I know that you said relatively low anti-incumbency, but if there was something that you could have done differently or you could have done better, what is that gap that you want to improve on if you get an next term?
Well, that's a very dangerous question for a sitting minister. But I would put it slightly differently. I would say the fact that my chief minister keeps calling for a Dravida model 2.0 is an implicit acknowledgement that there are things we should do differently and better. Now, that is actually quite thoughtful, at some level it's just a cliche, everything is 2.0, 3.0. At some other level it's quite thoughtful because if you really look deep down, the world is a very different place today than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
In 2 or 3 macro ways. I'm not talking politics now, I'm just talking like, global developments. After decades of no real serious wars, we are starting to see wars of the kind that could really get to be global kind of contagion and have deeply affected the markets. I believe, like many of my former colleagues on Wall Street, that we are underestimating, and not pricing in the true disruption that could happen, because so far we have seen only the first order effects and it's only been a few weeks. And it reminds me of the crisis around the global financial crisis, also around the COVID epidemic. It took a while to sink in what this really means and how long it is likely to last and what will be the second order, third order consequences. So, I'm not a doomsayer, but I really feel like the markets are not, except the bond market, which is starting to really stick to a different stance. Most markets, including stock market, including the commodities and energy markets, are not quite pricing in what could turn out to be much more complicated. And that is, again, will not be a 2-year, 3-year trend. If it hits that kind of inflection point, it will be 10, 20 years. Oil prices and energy prices have like long cycles. Yeah. They're not, because, it affects the production, the long story.
And the trickle effect of that,
The third way I would say is particularly in the age of this kind of special age of AI. There have been many previous ages of AI.
Yeah.
And what I think is really unique about this, and very few people connect the dots, is not just that we have advanced technology in terms of almost zero cost for marginal cost for additional storage of data or generation of data, or relatively contractually short-term available access to huge amounts of computing power without having to invest hundreds of millions or $1 billion, which used to be the case where it was not cloud, where it was captive.
Correct.
Only people who had that kind of money. Now you can rent that kind of power for an hour.
More democratic in that sense.
Yeah, in that sense. But beyond all of that, there is actually a huge correlation with the fact that ever since the global financial crisis, we have been going from one bubble to another. Hundreds of billions of dollars of capital to go into kind of expanding AI platforms and data centers and chip design and manufacturing with no viable economic model in sight. It's like, trust me, someday you'll make money. The science is advancing very rapidly, but the economics don't make any sense. And that would not happen if there wasn't all this excess liquidity sloshing around. So we have all these variables going on. And so it's completely a different world, actually. Of course, every election is different, but in some sense, the election of 2021 was so different from 16 because of COVID.
Yeah.
And the election of 26 for us as a state is so different from 21 because of all these variables which are relatively new or have crystallized or accelerated in ways that we could not have envisioned back in 21. So I think, therefore, we have to adapt. And I think that's the point. The point is, at least for me, and this is anathema to 100% of the bureaucracy, with very few exceptions, and anathema to a large percentage of the politicians, is that change is inevitable. You have to drive change. And then we have, people like our Prime Minister who know that and who's all for change, but he does it more for like the the announcement of change rather than the actual thoughtfulness of outcomes, right? Or the improvement. And then we have most other politicians who don't have that kind of courage. And so, whether you like it or not, change is happening. Sometimes it happens faster than other times.
Yeah.
And so, the thoughtful government really needs to adapt. So, for me, what we need to do differently is not because we have this program or that program or anything else. We need to rethink what are the priorities, because 2026 gives you a whole different projection of the next 10 years than 2021 did, vastly.
Yeah.
And so that would be, I would say, the main focus.
I was going to come to this a little later, but since you spoke of AI and you were the IT minister, we saw what happened with Oracle. AI is a real threat that people don't know how to deal with because it's emerging.
Yeah.
So how would you deal with job losses, coupled with the fact that there is tariff that is at Tamil Nadu, probably the most compared to any other state?
Yeah.
Are these issues that you will be talking to your voters about?
Yeah, I'm not sure the voters are yet aware of the implications broadly. But I would say the two things that really worry me is that the tariffs, again, were expected to be short term, but are now starting to kind of, grow some legs. And therefore, the long-term or medium-term implications of these tariffs will be hugely felt. To some sense, to some level, they have been offset by everywhere else the order is broken. So now we are exporting a lot more relatively to China. We were much less than China. Now a lot of stuff, for example, in iPhones.
Right.
Huge amount. We've gone like 750%, 800% in iPhone export in the last 3-4 years, not even 5 years. The factories were already here. It's just that the flow came here instead of going to China, or came out of China into here.
Yeah.
The AI in the short term is not as big a threat for us, I think, as it is to other places like the advanced countries. Because there's a lot of work that needs to go into helping these models learn. These machine learning models require so much data annotated and parsed and broken in such specific ways that I would say, in Tamil Nadu at least, what has happened is a big shift from the traditional employers, the large service organizations, the Infosys, TCSs, Cognizants of the world. They used to hire tens of thousands of new employees a year. They are down to flat. That's a big shift.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is the amount of innovation coming in at the startup level is through the roof. We went from something like 2,300 or 2,200 registered startups with the government of India's DPIIT. And we now have 13,800 or something at last count in 5 years. That's like 6x. And the other thing is that a lot of companies that service the AI kind of ecosystem are increasing their headcount quite a bit. So I know 2 or 3 companies because I spoke to the CEO, and she came and set up in Coimbatore after I met her in 2024. It's called iMerit. And there they help parse information and visual information mostly to help the learning models, the machine learning models for autonomous vehicles and health, diagnostic health. So there, she went from zero to setting up. I met her in July of 2024. By February, March of 2025, she had like 180 or 200 people. I met her recently in Delhi, and she's now like maybe double that headcount or something. So there are jobs being created and will probably for the next few years.
It'll offset perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. But I'm saying the nature of the model is changing. It is no longer going to be large, routine, repeatable kind of work because the machines will do that. Right now, they are being done for free because the big AI companies are able to get hundreds of billions of dollars of funding with no expectation of return. At some point, that is also going to come in. The limitations of ubiquitous AI replacing humans are going to be whether there's enough patient capital that will allow it to happen, whether they can get chips fast enough, whether they can build that many data centers without the communities rebelling and complaining about the heat generated, whether they can get that much water and other natural, whether they can get that much power. There's a lot of other constraints into this. So I'm a bit more sanguine about gross or net job losses in the next 3, 5, 8 years. If you ask me, in 20 years, it's going to be a different world
No,
altogether.
we're hoping to have another conversation with you before that. So
but
we'll get to that
but
then.
in the short term, I think the volatility requires thoughtful administration, policy, and kind of risk management. But I'm not expecting that there will be, massive disruption in the short term, maybe 2, 3, 5 years. Yeah.
Okay. I want to speak about cess and surcharge because time and again, many southern governments, including Tamil Nadu, have taken up the reducing and sometimes slightly increasing share of states in the Finance Commission. But this is a bigger challenge, isn't it? That is not spoken about enough. Have you taken this?
Many people have spoken about it. I've spoken about it. Chief Minister has spoken about it. Communists have spoken about it. Kerala Chief Minister has spoken about it. We have done, a lot of people have spoken about it. I won't say he's a good friend, but my friend Krishna Bairagowda has spoken about it a lot. It is actually against the intent. Now, we've got a little bit of a problem, right? A lot of things that were not truly intended in the Constitution, one would think, or based on the debates of the Constituent Assembly, have come to pass. To me, the GST is very badly designed and not justifiable in its bad design, but that's a different story. I've been public about it in the GST Council, forget whether I do it or not. But the cess and surcharge business should never have been allowed in the first place. There is no provision for it without going through some kind of finagling of the interpretation of the Constitution. And like many things, and this is a bit dangerous, like many things, it was not created by the BJP. But the BJP government has kind of levered up a loophole they found to excess.
We often say that BJP is Congress on steroids.
Yeah. Sadly, in fact, I'll go the other way. I think the philosophy of anybody or the mentality of anybody that is a national party that achieves simple or greater majority in Delhi and significant control of enough states tends to be authoritarian, tends to think they will last forever, tends to create laws and schemes and provisions that they think will never be abused because they will stay in power forever and only do it right. Both parties have had bad history on that.
But is this something you'll take up again? Because
Of course. No, because they have a greater share. It used to be like 0,
Correct.
then 3%, then 5%, now something like 20%.
Yeah.
And in particular, if you remember, the most blatant of them was the conversion of 100% of the excise on petrol and diesel into complete surcharge and cess.
Because it comes with many conditions attached, and some of the fights that you've had.
Listen. I'll go one step further. Let's be like very, very profound. I didn't answer your question earlier, so I'll answer it now. At a personal level, I have definitely affection for the finance minister, mostly because she has always acted with great dignity and support whenever we have gone, which is something within her power, which is an operational kind of executive decision. For example, the releasing of back dues of GST and all that when I was finance minister, or some changes to the modality of operating of the GST Council. Not just for me, whoever spoke for however long at the GST Council, she never once cut them short or said stop. She is that kind of person at a personal interaction level. At a policy level, of course, the model of GST is wrong. Of course, the taking of cess and surcharge is wrong. I'll go one step further. As through N.K. Singh, my friend who was chairman of 15th Finance Commission, he was not my friend then, he's my friend now, pointed out, if you are now complaining about centrally sponsored schemes, there was no provision for the notion of what is a centrally sponsored scheme. It is a central government deciding to spend money on subjects that are in the state list of the Constitution.
With the conditions, any kind of conditions,
whatever they want.
deem fit.
So he says, at a core level, I agree with you. This notion of centrally sponsored schemes itself is bad in constitutional design. Who started it?
Of course.
Why were you quiet all these days? So, in that sense, he has a point. I have a reverse point, which is that There has been no government in the history of India, or for that matter, most federal setups in the world, that has weaponized the taxpayers' revenues as a political tool, as a political kind of leverage, or in pursuit of kind of control, as this government. So they're doing more and more of it.
My last question is about something that has come to define elections these days, welfareism. The Supreme Court has also said that, when these measures are announced, and they call it freebies, of course, when very close to the elections, then it could be driven by election. How do you differentiate between what is essential and what is populist?
A very complex question. Since it's the last question, we'll talk about it in a bit of length, because you're a very thoughtful journalist. At the surface level, I would say 95% of this debate is hypocrisy. If I do it, I consider it welfare. If you do it, I consider it freebie. No better example of this than the Honorable Prime Minister coming up with the phrase Revdi culture when he was accusing the AAP mainly in some election. And then what has happened now, the BJP governments in Delhi and Bihar and Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh give away all kinds of money. Relative to the per capita income of Bihar, 10,000 is like a queen's ransom.
Of course.
So hypocrisy must be set aside first. Now you come to the next level of thinking and you say, should the state be in the business of providing welfare through cash payments or not? There again, I will go to my earlier statement that all around the world, if you look, all governments are failing at doing real things and are resorting to doing these kinds of quick things. And sometimes it's for the reason of politics. Sometimes it's because if you take the Western economies, their pension costs are rising dramatically. Their social security pension costs are rising because of aging population. So, a brilliant analysis I saw, I forget the magazine, I think it was The Economist, maybe 2-3 years ago. It says, if you look at the size of government as a percentage of the economy across different countries, that has stayed roughly the same over the last 30 years. In Sweden and the welfare states of Western Europe, the government is a bigger part of the economy. They provide free health, free education, free maternity, free paternity, free training, good unemployment. Because they're a bigger tax collector, bigger spender. Maybe a capitalist country like America, they're less. Maybe a not so well-off country like India, maybe even less. It's not because of philosophy, it's because government is unable to collect revenue. So the spending and the kind of income has been the same. That is to say, whatever percentage of the economy you were, you always are. Intra-country differences are huge, but within a country, longitudinally over time, you have stayed the same. But two profound things have changed. One, more of your revenues are through borrowing and less are through actual taxation and fees and charges and government raising revenues. That means the oligarchs and the plutocrats and the capitalists are taking control of the system and paying in less and less, and governments are taking public debt, which is almost equally, by definition, equally spread on all the population at a greater and greater rate. This is across all countries. Irrespective of whether 30% of the economy or 20% of the economy, 50% of the economy, you are increasingly funding yourself with debt and less through revenue. Go the flip side. You are increasingly giving more and more cash transfers to people and doing less and less work yourself. Right? We have a department called the Public Works Department. My grandfather was Minister for Public Works back in 1930 or something, under Dayaki in the British era. Back then, the Public Works Department actually owned construction equipment and actually built things.
Right.
Now, the Public Works Department of most states is a contracting entity. From the smallest projects to the biggest projects are contracted to third parties. Government doesn't really do anything.
Which are even allowed to collect tolls after that.
Then 100 things happen, right? And yet the job titles are all called assistant engineer, superintending engineer, chief engineer, divisional engineer. They are not doing any engineering, right? At best, they are evaluating the engineering designs of the contractor. Anyway, so in that sense, I'm saying it exemplifies the fact that governments are doing less and less themselves. And as a whole proportion of their spending, they are continuing to be 15%, 18%, 20% different countries, but they do more and more. Sweden does more of it in social security and pensions and less of it in building hospitals and roads and more. India does more and more of it in schemes and less of it in, again, infrastructure or other kinds of expenditures, right? So in this context, you have to see past the hypocrisy, past the broader trend of failing government capability, the notion of giving out more and more kind of handouts for good or bad reasons. But in reality, it is developmental investment. For example, the noon meal scheme or the free breakfast scheme or the laptop scheme or the giving cycles to students scheme or the increased expanded health insurance scheme or the support for wedding scheme, which we changed. But anyway, these are all schemes that are intended to either increase the likelihood of healthier, more nourished, better educated workforce 5, 10, 20 years from now, or to prevent people from falling into debt because of unexpected health problems or big costs related to wedding or something
and also
like that.
improve HDI.
Yeah, I mean, that is basically, that is because you give them more calories and better kind of support and equipment and, free, we give free uniforms, we give free slippers. Like Tamil Nadu's education success is built on these kinds of things that we support in many ways. Then there are schemes that it depends a lot on the implementation. And I've said this when I was an opposition MLA in 2018. It's ironic that the government of India has now got rid of the scheme altogether. I said, if you take something like the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, if people actually do work for it.
Are you referring to the Manrega?
Yeah. And they actually, diesel tanks or build community halls or build the taluk office. Or what if they do things that are actually productive and meaningful? There's a brilliant scheme because you're ensuring the bottom of the pyramid has minimum quality of life. You're ensuring productivity. You're ensuring employment, and you'll have a multiplier effect. But hypothetically, I'm not saying it happens, but I'm saying hypothetically, if I was to pay people in the villages at a micro level that same money to do nothing. You might call it UBI, you call it whatever, but I'm saying hypothetically at the micro level, you give them the money to do nothing. So I said, let's say I now pay 100 or 150 rupees a day to do nothing. Surely the people who do something in the field will now ask for 250 or 300. Yeah. Now you have driven up the wages. You have started to define inflation. If the cost of labor going into the production of agricultural output is going up, the cost of the food is going up. Now you've got food inflation, right? That goes into the basket, that will drive up wholesale inflation, consumer inflation, etc. So you can have the scheme in a way that it is actually dilutive because you're creating inflation faster than you're giving away money.
Right.
Then you can take our scheme where I've told you.
So you'd say that was populist?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'm saying some schemes are black and white investments. Some schemes are black and white risk management. Some schemes in the implementation can be good or bad.
Right.
Some schemes like this Urume Toge, I'm saying, if I am right, and part of the impact of that scheme is that it has driven up consumption because it is targeted still, though it was hugely criticized for being targeted. And, had I continued in finance, I would not say, it's a long story, it doesn't matter. The point is, there are 2.3 crore ration card families in Tamil Nadu. Only 1.3 crore of them are getting the scheme. So we have data enough to know who is one could argue whether that number should be 1.8 or 1 or 1.2, but it is not 2.3.
Right.
In that sense, it is targeted. Now, if I say that because of that, the consumption increased and the multiplier effect increased and that contributed towards the 11.19%, then maybe it is a worthwhile scheme because it has given me a multiplier effect.
Right.
The flip side, I could argue, clearly it has increased the revenue deficit. The revenue deficit, when I read it out in 2023, was 30,000. They did some accounting adjustments and all that and made it slightly higher. But that was down to 30,000 from 62,000. This year, it has now come back to 69,000. Now, again, adjusted for inflation, adjusted for size of the economy and all, it's not much worse. But I'm saying it has gone in that direction. So then my counterpart could argue, no, you should not have done the scheme because you have increased the revenue deficit. I could then argue at the more deep level than that, if I find that growth accelerates because of it, then surely the consequence of that will be that my revenues will grow up. And because of that, I will have more income next year, and therefore it justifies and so. So these are all
cycle in that.
These are all complicated questions. It's very hard to make spot judgments of these, and it requires some cycle. Then I give you the extreme example of the other side, which I've criticized many times, and at the risk of boring myself and you, I'll say it. The former Chief Minister, Madam Jayalalitha, announced a scheme where she said, I will give, at the time, the average two-wheeler cost about 50,000 rupees. But she said, I will give 50% subsidy or 25,000 rupees to 1 lakh people to buy two-wheelers. It didn't say whether urban, rural, all this stuff, right? Now, that scheme I criticized roundly. Because I said, for multiple reasons. If you had made it more targeted and said, in rural areas where buses don't ply, I do this something, I can maybe fall behind it. But if you give it generically across, I say 2, 3 things. One, as it is, we are a state that has a huge kind of outlier in number of power two-wheelers. I don't think there's any other place in the world, to my knowledge, you'll have to correct me. But we have, I told you, 2.3 crore families according to the ration database. I think we have something like 2.9 crore registered power two-wheelers. This ratio is like more than 1 per family is already there. Second, already the roads are super congested and full of parked vehicles, and therefore you are now adding to that through your subsidy.
And you're driving people away from public transport.
Now, that's the worst of it. The worst of it is you are trying to make your struggling public transport system more utilized. And here you're going to do the reverse. So, at that time I said it is a very bad scheme, and just as other people tried to point Revdi on us, I asked the question, if at that time the Honorable Prime Minister and Home Minister were so, dead set against Revdis, why did one of them come and open or inaugurate the two-wheeler handout scheme?
Right.
Surely that is as big a Revdi as it gets. Now there's all the second order, third order effects. If you're only going to give 100,000 of these, and the benefit is 25,000 per person, do you think there's likely to be rent seeking or corruption in the allocation of beneficiaries? Surely for 1 lakh beneficiaries, there must be at least 10 lakh valid applications. Who gets to decide which one? So, these are, we could talk for 2 hours on this. Hypocrisy is easy. Sloganeering is easy. Thoughtful policy is complicated and requires second order, third order thinking. I've also done a long analysis of the free cows and goats scheme. The goats worked, the cows didn't. It's a long story why, but you can look into that.
Right.
And
I thank you for your time, and we look forward to once, if you come back to PA, having another conversation on what your vision will be for the next 5 years. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
We've been on the ground bringing you ground reports on the elections in Assam, Bengal, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. We have been able to do this only because you've had our back so far, but we need you to continue doing this. So what are you waiting for? Fund our election coverage, because we don't take money from politicians, political parties or governments. We rely only on your support, so do support our election coverage.